Hello, and thank you for joining us today in person, and those of you who are joining us on Zoom, hello. This talk will take a tour of Scotland, looking at all sorts of landscapes as represented through the medium of the popular postcard, from their introduction just over 150 years ago. We'll send greetings from the Scottish seaside, messages from high mountain passes, embrace all manner of terrain and transport, and spot some wildlife on our archive travels today. This 1903 postcard shows the Forth Bridge as seen from Fife. And as someone has just commented, the message written at the bottom is rather lovely. And it says, "May our friendship be as strong as the bridge, ever be as strong as the bridge." So as Neil just said, my name is Jackie Sangster and I am part of the Learning and Inclusion team here at Historic Environment Scotland. I do work mainly with digital archives, so that's Scran, Canmore, the National Collection of Aerial Photography, as many as the others which are listed on the back of your St Kilda card. My role involves a lot of outreach and engagement work, so I do talks on all sorts of topics, and this particular one is a rather fun one, and we'll be taking a zigzagging tour around the country as we go. It's worth noting at this point that all the imagery contained in today's talk is gathered from HES archives. Pictured in 1878 is the Edinburgh General Post Office. It opened in 1866 at the east end of Princes Street, a location important in today's postal narrative. So, what can a postcard tell us? The 20th century saw an explosion of tourism at home and abroad, and with the invention of the postcard, people were able to share their news and tell of their adventures. Much like social media today, postcards were powerful visual tools in creating a sense of place and identity, sending political messages, as well as reinforcing ideas of empire. These souvenirs also opened up the world for many people, providing windows to far-flung places and escapism from routine working life. I'd like to point out the postcard on the right of the cottage behind the bridge. This is a postcard of the Clachan Post Office at the Empire exhibition in 1938. The Clachan was in fact a recreation of a Highland village in Glasgow. And this conjuring of an imaginary Scottish settlement happened 16 years before the film Brigadoon in 1954. Anyway, one of the Clachans, and indeed the exhibition's most popular features, was the whitewashed, thatched post office from which posted letters and cards were franked with a unique stamp. Beside the post office, a newspaper board advertises the Oban Times. And on the brig over the tiny burn, a couple are posed, writing a postcard. Very meta. We shall return to this location later. Meanwhile, I wish to introduce the striking unnamed woman who is a postcard seller, stood by her pop-up shop. I'm curious to know more, but sadly I have no further information about who or where she is, as I'd really benefit from her expertise. So, to begin our talk properly, let's look at the origins of the postcard. This is not a postcard. Whoops, sorry, wrong. I've gone 1, 2. Apologies. So, as I said, this is not a postcard, but I'm setting the scene here in Shetland. This photograph was taken in the early 1870s. Scotland's society, and subsequently its landscape, had shifted from rural subsistence with people moving from the countryside to urban industrial environments in our towns and cities. Today, we exist in an almost post-industrial landscape. Postcards have captured many of these moments and unintentionally documented our country's evolution. Moving south to Tayside in 1878. The first postcards were introduced in Austria in 1869, and the British Post Office followed suit in 1870 with blank postcards. These had pre-printed stamps on one side for the address and the reverse for the message, and neither side had an image. This early postcard has a brief message. It was lovely here today. Postcards were cheap and a quick form of communication. Initially, they cost half the price of sending a letter, which no doubt added to their appeal. It's also worth remembering, on the whole, people did not have their own cameras. Portable photography, and indeed travel, was for the wealthy. So if you wish to preserve precious memories or views, scenery and places, collecting postcards was the solution. Here we have arrived in Archer in 1880. Again, the message is a single line. This is the hotel I have marked. And if you can just make out on the white building to the right, there is an X just underneath. Hopefully at the back row, you can just about make that out. Now, I promised you some wildlife along the way. So here is the monarch of the glen, a staple of what people associate with Scottish landscape and often found on shortbread tins too. This Arran deer stands on rough pasture with bare woodland beyond. The quotation probably comes from Scott. Deer stalking became popular pursuit for the wealthy classes at the turn of the 19th century. This dramatic photographic postcard was taken by George Washington Wilson, a famous Victorian photographer. It shows the breathtaking, rugged Brore, an island of St Kilda, and it was taken in 1885. Postcards were so popular, 75 million travelled through the post office system in their first year. This satirical postcard pokes fun at the polluted nature of Coatbridge's atmosphere, caused by the smoke from the hundreds of chimneys of the town's steel and other works. It was common saying in Coatbridge, the smoke and fumes from the ironworks turned night into day and day into night. The industrialists in the town resisted attempts to clean the environment due to the high costs involved. Sounds familiar. Similar versions of this postcard were produced in many industrial towns throughout the length of the United Kingdom. For example, here's a similarly sarcastic Bonnie Dundee, a scene industrialised and polluted with a sea of smoking chimneys in the foreground and in the law in the distance. There was some fresher air to be had in Argyll in the 1890s, however, when pictorial postcards were first accepted by the post office. Here we see the postmistress at the door of the thatched cottage used as the post office in Kintail. Of course, she would have been able to read all the postcards passing through. Strict rules applied to sending pictorial postcards when they were accepted in 1894. That is the same year as this example showing Broughty Ferry, again, with its castle this time, from the River Tay. The image and message had to be on the same side with a small area for writing, and the address on the reverse. The sender here has clearly been creative with the format and pushed the envelope. Leaving the 1800s behind, let's enter the postcard boom of the early 20th century. Rather than a Scottish landscape, this postcard is showing us Scots in a landscape, far from home in India. When created, it sent a very different message than it does today about empire. It's an advertising postcard for R. Patterson and Sons, makers of camp coffee, from the turn of the century. The postcard shows a group of Gordon Highlanders enjoying a picnic above their camp. In 1999, the label on bottles of camp coffee caused dispute between the Sikh community and the makers, as it showed a turbaned Sikh serving a tray of drinks to Gordon Highlander officers. Gladly, this subservient depiction has been improved. Camp coffee, still in production, now shows two men enjoying the drink together. I'm including this 1908 postcard under the heading Cultural Landscape, showing the humour of the time based on stereotypes, published by Miller and Lang of London and Glasgow. It shows a caricature of a Cockney in the Highlands. The Londoner is pictured looking ill at ease in full Highland dress and a kilt that is way too short for him. Here we are on the Isle of Bute. This shows the layout of early pictorial postcard, which would have been officially accepted by the Post Office Service. This is Ettrick or Kames Bay, not far from Rothesay, with few horse-drawn carriages and a welcome tea chalet to the right. This is the reverse of the card, sent in 1904, with writing all over the place. It's quite faded, so hopefully you can just about see the writing. It's addressed to Miss Jessie Duncan at the GPO in Glasgow. It reads, "Dear Jessie, how did you enjoy St. Enoch's? I suppose you will be a dab at slip knots and big bundles by this time. Hope you enjoyed your weekend at home. Would you be so kind and look my duty and let me know if it's early? I would like very much if Effie could give me a late change. If she can't, perhaps some other late girl would, but I much prefer a late duty at St. Enoch's if I can get one. Please excuse me giving you all this bother. Love from Margaret." I'm always curious to know what was her job? What was St. Enoch's? Was it a hospital? Was it a factory? Were they in manufacture? Were they housekeepers? And I would love to find out. So if you have information, let me know at the end. This sender followed the format rules a little more closely. Address to be written on this side. The addressee is Miss Bella Ramage, Star Dairy, West Maitland, Edinburgh. Sent in 1905, judging by the postmark, but no message. Why could this be? And where was it sent from? Let's flip it over and find out. It was sent from Duloch Avenue, a tree-lined lane just north of Inverary in Argyll. Regarding the landscape, it's very much an ordered and manicured vision of the countryside. Note, we're still using horsepower. The message, straight to the point, reads, "Was here yesterday, return home tomorrow, Thursday. Will you please send up at 7 p.m. a quart of milk, a penny's worth of cream, 3 penny scones, half a pound of butter. Hope all are well. Yours very sincerely, Dora Keeloch." Like that card, we're returning to the capital's postal hub, the General Post Office, at the east end of Princes Street, for a glimpse of it in May 1905. As you may know, this landmark building was vacated by the Post Office in the late 90s. Time for a snippet of postal history. The report, Post Office Reform, Its Importance and Practicability, practicability, was published in 1837. The then government reformed the post office in 1840, introducing a flat rate for letters irrespective of distance. The post became a service which was now available to the masses. Improvements in transport also revolutionised the mail service. By 1870, the amount of mail had increased 10 times its pre-reform level. And as we have already seen, there were rules to be followed. The addressee only to be written on this side. Addressed to Mr. F. or J. Cecil Wardle, Ingleside, Bath Street, Stonehaven. Sent in 1902, judging by the postmark. But where was it sent from? Let's flip it over and find out. Aha! It's a sunny day in Rothesay, looking west from Guildford Place. The message written on the front of the card reads, "Just to let you know, I'm still alive. Have been here over a week now and think I'll like it all right. Haven't much spare time, however, as we're busy getting the house in order. I've been looking out for a nice boy, like you, ever since I came, but haven't come across one yet. 6 exclamation marks. Be good, Meg." Of course, postcards were an open form of communication, as they could be read by postal workers and, worse, family members. Therefore, this led to coded messages and a secret language. The innovation which made this covert communication possible was the self-adhesive stamp. So let's flip the postcard back over again and look at the angle of the stamp a little more closely. Meg intended a meaning when she added this. We can see the halfpenny stamp is affixed upside down and the tilted to the right, judging by Edward VII's inverted head. According to my research and the Postal Museum, this translates as, "Have you forgotten me?" And if it were leaning slightly further to the right, it would say, "With all my heart." I can't help but wonder what happened to Meg and Cecil's relationship and how it played out in the end. Then, from Kirkcaldy to Pollockshaw's Road in Glasgow, John is a little enigmatic in his written message to Miss Sarah Watson, saying, "Hope you are well, can't say more." However, the stamp is leaning to the left, which equals, "I love you." Next, we hear from Mary in 1902. No secret message, though. The familiar divided back postcard was introduced in this year, and it is the most common postcard format which remains with us today. That is, the message and the address are on one side, divided by a line, and usually a picture on the other side. Interesting, I wanted to point out the spelling of County Down is spelled D-O-U-N-E, and this, if we think about the date, is pre-partition Ireland. Okay, so let's get back to the landscape. This postcard takes us to the highest point of Scotland. The illustration shows the observatory and hotel on the top of the snowbound Ben Nevis. Around 1900, when tourism was growing rapidly. The observatory was opened in 1883 by the Scottish Meteorological Society. With 3 members in staff in residence, it provided weather information every single hour for 20 years. And the hotel was opened later for climbers. Less scientific, this postcard shows us a religious ceremony taking an outdoor sacrament around 1900 in Rothshire. Most of the congregation sit on the ground, and the small wooden hut is a preaching tent to keep the preacher dry. The caption on the card states, "Only the older inhabitants take communion." Services were held out of doors either because the local church was too small or because the congregation did not agree with the teachings of any of the nearby churches. This postcard illustrates the verse beginning, "We twa hae played in the burn," and shows a nostalgic scene of two boys wearing kilts. They are knee-deep in a stream and have caught a large fish in a piece of tartan cloth. Surrounding them is a treeless highland landscape. It is, of course, a coloured lithograph scene from Robert Burns' most famous song, Auld Lang Syne. Off to Oban next, and don't spare the horses. This black and white sepia monochrome photographic postcard shows us a full carriage of passengers on the pass of Melfort near Oban. This was a popular day trip, and the circular tour by Loch Fiachan and Loch Awe lasted 8.5 hours. It cost 19 shillings and sixpence in 1903. Spot the difference. This again is the Pass of Melfort, with horse-powered passengers and an almost identical composition. However, we now have an added dimension, colour. The first processes of colour photography appeared in the 1890s, based on the earlier theory demonstrated by Scotsman James Clerk Maxwell. However, colour photography was not common until later in the 20th century. So, the colour we see in early postcards often comes from the hand tinting process. Postcards began as a conventional black and white picture and were painted by hand prior to production. In the earlier days, this took place in a photographer's studio. As demand expanded, factories were established, employing large numbers of women to hand tint photographs prior to printing. The transparent paints were oil-based, and many of the colourists would suffer illness as a result of licking the brushes to form a point. The colouring was sometimes crudely done, sometimes very accomplished. Some postcards will feature just a small colour highlighted area. Others will attempt to reproduce lifelike images. The arrival of colour photography and the health issues associated with the hand-tinted cards resulted in their demise in the 1930s. Here we can see a hand-tinted landscape looking across the rooftops of the Borders in 1904. And here is a long-gone landscape. The Scottish National Exhibition in Edinburgh in 1908 was to show the best of Scottish art, science, industry and literature. This unused coloured postcard shows the site in Saughton Park. Of course, this was a temporary exhibition and only a few traces of it remain today. And if you're familiar with the area, you'll possibly recognise the gates, pillars. Back to black and white as we head homeward. A view of farm workers and horses returning to the village of Swanston, a little farming community close to the southern boundary of Edinburgh at the foot of the Pentland Hills. The village had, at the turn of the 20th century, 9 Clydesdale horses, which were used on the land. This remains one of Edinburgh's most picturesque villages and is now a conservation area. Moving along to the 1910s next, with a regal welcome from Edinburgh Castle and the Palace of Holyrood House. This elaborate postcard featuring Holyrood Park, framed by emblematic thistles, was a souvenir of King George V's visit in 1911. It was sent from Edinburgh to Mrs. Forbes in West Lothian. Featuring some typically Scottish decoration, tartan, lucky heather, and a horseshoe framed the landscape of Callander Bridge and Ben Ledi. Tourism quintupled in 1810 after the publication of Walter Scott's poem, The Lady of the Lake, which was set in this beautiful Trossachs area. The card was sent from Monkton to Stonehouse in South Lanarkshire, 1912. We have reached the dizzy heights of Ben Nevis once again with our first postcard to feature a motor car in the landscape, and somewhat surprisingly at the summit of Scotland. This is a Model T Ford which was parked by the observatory and is noted as the first car to reach the top in 1912. And as my colleague Neil noticed the other day, down in the bottom right where it says Ben Nevis, it's written as one word, not Ben and Nevis, but Ben Nevis. And again, in 1914, a car. As we've sampled, humour has long been associated with the postcard, and maybe kilts too, so I could not pass up this example of prime Scottish kitsch. This colour cartoon, Raising the Wind in Bonnie Scotland, was addressed to Mrs. Walter Cripps in Walworth, and the rear message reads, "Dear Auntie Florrie, I wish you many happy returns of the day. Also the same from Mum and Dad. Love from all to Uncle Walter, baby, and yourself, from your loving nephew Freddie. Kiss, kiss, kiss." Firstly, this well-known painting is not a postcard. Its title is Glowed with Tints of Evening Hours, and it was painted in 1905 by Joseph Farquharson, one of Scotland's best-known landscape painters of sheep and winter scenes, for which he is famous, and it earned him a nickname which made me smile, Frozen Mutton Farquharson. I'm sharing this picture because its subject matter was also common fodder for the postcard industry of the time. Case in point, this postcard entitled To the Hill Pastures is a hand-tinted photograph sent in 1915 to from South Lanarkshire to Ayrshire. It shows a shepherd taking his sheep and lambs along the road to the hill pasture on a beautiful evening. Such subject matter was perhaps driven by nostalgia following the Industrial Revolution. The image of Scotland being a rural idyll was perhaps popular postcard theme in the early 20th century, one that perhaps continues today. In contrast to the rural idyll, here is a heavily industrialised Broxburn oil works in 1919. Such postcards document how we have used, adapted and altered our environment over time. To quote my HAS colleagues in their publication, Scotland's Landscapes, the narrative of bygone days has been inscribed in fields, forests, hills, and mountains, roads, railways, canals, lochs, buildings, and settlements. The rural ideal has been obliterated here. Again, not a Scottish landscape, but Scots in a landscape, a war-torn one. These Highlanders are piping themselves back from the trenches of World War I. Made by the Daily Mail, propaganda postcards such as this were regularly produced as a means of boosting patriotism and encouraging communication. It was an important medium in manipulating public opinion. Here, the war photographer John Warwick Brooke has pictured a soldier on sentry duty beside a ruined building, writing a card. Communication must have been a lifeline. At the time, postcards were increasingly popular with all sections of society, not only those serving in the military. Through examining the wording, it's possible to gauge the thoughts and feelings of the sender. And during the war, censors read all letters and postcards to make sure there was no information that was sensitive or a threat to national security. This is a field service postcard sent by John Henry, known as Jack Carmichael, in 1918 to his sister Kate, who lived in Stirling. Introduced later in the war, field service postcards were intended to alleviate the workload of those people charged with censoring soldiers' mail. They were known as quick firers. Very little could be written on them. For instance, the front of this card bears the statement on the left, the address only to be written on this side. If anything else is added, the postcard will be destroyed. Of course, the war ended in 1918, and here we have returned to the Forth Bridge with a postcard full of facts which no longer needed censorship. By this stage of the decade, everybody wanted to recuperate after the war with some leisure time. This postcard shows the crowds who enjoyed sailing on the Firth of Clyde and embarking on river steamers at Dunoon in 1919. The postcard is annotated with the name of two different steamers, the SS Juno and the SS Columba. The latter paddle steamer, Columba, was built for McBrain's in 1878 and was the largest, most luxurious steamer of her time. There were even shops on board and a post office, where passengers would undoubtedly have sent postcards galore. She served the Tarbert and Arisaig runs, known as the Royal Route, transporting upper-class passengers to their Highland homes and shooting lodges. Nice for some. And the good times rolled in Rothesay too, at the seaside on the promenade and by the bandstand. Many post-war holidaymakers were enjoying ornamental gardens, staying in hotels and sitting by the harbour. No doubt sending postcards to loved ones about all of the above. The roaring 20s are upon us. We've arrived in 1920s Edinburgh by the GPO, again on the corner of Waterloo Place and Northbridge, where all sorts of parcels, packages, letters, and of course postcards have been passing through in increasing amounts during the peak of the postcard boom. Here is an example showing us how the landscape of Edinburgh was expanding and urban environments were growing. Post-war, military technologies were being used commercially now in the production of postcards. That is aerial photography, which had been a vital reconnaissance tool just a few years earlier. This is, of course, Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, as seen from above. Although new technology did not always play a part, contemporary postcards depicted the changing landscapes of Scotland, but these personalised and localised pieces of paper also travelled through the landscape, often in hand, overland, with people like this. Sandy McPherson, the postman who brought the daily penny post from Lochailart to Glenuig in the Highlands by pony in the 1920s. The terrain of parts of Scotland can be difficult to cross. And in the 1930s, it took a mail van 4 hours to cover 20 miles, mirroring Sandy's route. Sandy with his pony were able to do it in less time because they did not always have to go on the proper roads. Our next Highland postcard destination is John O'Groats and Hotel, with tours in the background. It was addressed to Miss Ethel Kerr, 5 Seymour Road, Mile End, Stockport, Cheshire. Let's have a peek at the message. The sender, Peggy, seems to be rather impressed by the Highland landscapes she has just experienced. She says, "Dear Ethel, thanks for your card. A friend and I are doing an 8-hour tour of the an 8-day tour of the Scottish Highlands and have arrived here. I think I've viewed as much scenery during the last 4 days as I have in all my life. We had glorious sun yesterday from Inverness to Wick, all over Ord of Caithness, and are making for Lairg today. Peggy." And with that glowing report, we shall enter the 1930s. Not long after, this young motorcyclist sits on a bench outside the post office, also at John O'Groats. He appears to be writing a note home, perhaps saying he has made it to the reputedly most northerly point of the Scottish mainland. As this is often the way, the rural post office doubles as a shop and the core of remote communities. As we've established, post offices and indeed postcards were crucial to communication. This key function has decreased as we become increasingly digital in our 21st century lives. Certainly, post was essential in maintaining contact with the outside world for the residents of St Kilda. Neil Ferguson, referred to as the uncrowned king of St Kilda and the island's postmaster, is pictured here as he brings the last incoming mail to the St Kilda post office on Hirta, the day before the island was evacuated in 1930. While St Kilda had an ordinary postal service, this was at the whim of the weather, and sometimes they used a St Kilda mailboat to send mail. This was a small watertight container with a float, which was launched in the right wind. Apparently, the first set off in 1876 and got all the way to Norway. Next, wildlife of a very different nature lurks in the world-famous watery landscape. The Loch Ness Monster issues an open invitation on this humorous postcard saying, "Come up and see me sometime." This 1934 postcard contains another great Scottish tourist attraction. Since it was built in 1855, turreted Balmoral Castle, set in the wooded Loch Nagar landscape, has been inextricably linked to Queen Victoria and Royal Deeside, therefore having mass appeal for the booming postcard industry, namely Valentine's in this case. This is Loch Awe and Kilkern Castle in 1937. I added this primarily for the Highland cattle, as everybody loves a Highland coo. And I did promise some animal interest. Beyond the pasture and the ruined castle is a backdrop of bare, craggy mountains with a glen stretching into the distance. Picture perfect. Leaping into the future from Victorian Aberdeenshire and the ancient ruins of Argyll to an Art Deco vision. This temporary landscape was created for the Empire exhibition in Bellahouston Park. Remember the Clachan post office? Opened by King George VI on the 3rd of May, it ran until October of the same year. Hot off the press, postcards of the opening went on sale in Glasgow the very next day, before noon on the 4th of May. The futuristic Tower of Empire, as you can see in these 2 postcard examples, was designed by architect Thomas Tate and was supposed to remain in place as a permanent reminder of the exhibition. However, it had to be demolished to prevent German bombers using it as a navigational aid in the imminent World War II. The 1938 Empire Exhibition was the largest of its kind held in the United Kingdom in the 20th century. Open from May to October, the attendance for the 6-month run was almost 13 million people. This postcard illustration shows the vivid lighting which kept the Empire Exhibition alive after dark. Central to the view is the Crown Fountain. Behind is the north facade with its flanking staircase. Sorry, the North Cascade. The cascading waters fell over glass weirs lit from below, while the concrete stairs were surfaced in a finish called glitterite. Rising from the summit of Bellahouston Hill, the Tower of Empire was floodlit with blue and white, with each of the observation balconies picked out in yellow, amber, and green. In some ways, the exhibition's architecture and landscape was influenced as much by Hollywood sets and cinema as it was by its modern architecture. I always say every time I mention the Empire Exhibition, if I could time travel, that is where I would go back to. If only the spirit of the exhibition had remained. World War II put paid to such frivolities, and here are the Royal Scottish Fusiliers at Ayr Race Course on a postcard in 1940. The soldiers are gathered in the parade ground, and this photograph was taken shortly before they were sent out to the European mainland to fight. The race course was used as a temporary campsite for soldiers at the time. This is a soldier's comforts postcard. It was returned to Miss Kerr of Belhaven, together with a letter from an American soldier somewhere in North Africa. It was the return half of a scheme whereby Miss Kerr had paid for a parcel of cigarettes to be presented through the Overseas League Tobacco Fund, one of the many wartime organisations supporting the services. Leaving the war behind, we shall trundle out of this decade via the cityscape of Charing Cross in Glasgow. This tinted street photo is surrounded by Robertson Tartan and the double-decker tram scene with cars and pedestrians. It shows us what was later demolished to make way for the M8. Things begin to look a little brighter again. But excuse me while we take a detour to Dundee on this double-decker bus in the 1950s, all to find out about the household name in the postcard business. Valentine's was a well-known Dundee company which had started its life as an engravers in 1825. On their premises at 100 Murraygate, the departments included an engraving and printing department, a stationery department, a picture frame department, and possibly the one for which Valentine's is best known, a photographic department. Renowned for popularising the picture postcard and capitalising on rapid developments in photography, printing and tourism in the early 20th century, Valentine's produced a fascinating body of work. It was one of Dundee's most successful employers for over 150 years. This is, in fact, the reverse side of the Charing Cross postcard. Also note the 1940s printed quote. On the left, it says, "We shall continue steadfast in faith and duty in until our task is done." The Prime Minister. Here we can see a factory worker at Valentine's and Company in 1948. Improvements in technology and machinery made a difference to almost every single job. This particular machine was used for the greetings card business. It is a rotary slitting machine. Valentine's were one of the most innovative publishers in the world. and their skilled workforce contributed hugely to that success. Despite massive industrialization in the workplace, some jobs still had to be done by hand. These women are tying ribbons on bows to be attached to greetings cards. Hard-working Dundonians made a huge contribution to Valentine's and therefore the city's social and historical landscape. Here is an advertising display case, especially for Valentine's postcards. Whoops, sorry. Let me just go back again so you can see it. So the wooden case that we have here was supplied to postcard sellers, and this one in particular was for a shop or trader somewhere in the Isle of Arran, because it is only displaying postcards of Arran in the 1950s. These Valentine multi-view postcards no doubt look familiar to many of you. They were created for Scottish locations up and down the land. This Loch Fyne example features a Scotty dog with Heather for luck, plus 4 local scenes: the bowling green, the Crinan Canal, the pier entrance, and there are also 3 Albion single-deckers and a steamer at the pier. Now, I actually have an example of a Valentine's multi-view card. Let me see if I'm just holding this up. Having trouble getting that to pick up on the camera. Sorry, people online, it's not detecting it for some reason. You can have a look at this afterwards if you'd like, if those of you in the room. So there's a little black cat at the centre and it says "Good luck from Dunbar" as opposed to the Scotty dog. There were variations in the format. I'm sure you've come across them. The St Andrews University Library cares for the Valentine's collection, and Scran, the service which I work with on a daily basis, holds 1,862 of those records digitally, such as this absolute cracker of a seaside card from Portobello Pool in June 1936. This image offers a view of the former Valentine's factory in Westfield Avenue, Dundee. When this photograph was taken in 1985, the building was empty and showing signs of vandalism. The heyday of the postcard had come and gone by this time. And upwards into the 1960s. I'm just getting messages. My microphone working okay, Joe? I'm just checking for those people online. Oh, it's gone away. I had a little message flat. Okay. Am I still broadcasting? Yeah, okay. Highland women were still staffing remote post offices like this. Meet Mrs. Mackay stood at the door of the corrugated metal post office of Skourie in Sutherland around 1960. Behind the tiny post office in the sparse landscape is a telegraph pole, carrying cables for both telephone and telegram. Here's the style of postcard in the mail during this decade. Still plenty of Scottish iconography, with a piper playing on a heathery hill, sending greetings from Dunbar and district. And this novelty postcard was also published by Valentine's. And here I also have a reproduction of the same piper. Opened in 1947, are we okay? Yeah. This postcard let us see what Butlin's holiday camp was like in Ayr during July 1961. Perhaps some of you holidayed there. Clear skies and surprisingly good weather. Another souvenir postcard from Dunbar. I confess, this is where I live. I'm not being biased, there happen to be quite a few good examples. This particular one contains a rotating insert with 4 views in addition to the 5 vignettes on the front. It was introduced in the 1960s, but did not prove popular. Perhaps it was more expensive, is my thinking. This Ford Anglia has a magnificent view. This Ford Anglia has a magnificent view through the mountains to Applecross. The Technicolor postcard was addressed to Michael Doherty in Glasgow. And let's see what the message was. Please note the postage stamp featuring Queen Elizabeth II at a price of 3p. You may recall originally postcards cost half the price of letters to send, and the cheaper cost contributed to their immense popularity, especially in the Edwardian era. However, it was in this year, 1968, that the reduced postage tariff was removed and the cost was the same as a letter, and so hastening its decline. Let's find out what the sender Danny has been up to. The message reads, "Dear Mick, have been out canoeing, abseiling, brackets, that's jumping off a cliff a bit, in bracket, and climbing. Managed to pick up a bit of a suntan, but tired myself out in the process. Got a letter from Eleanor yesterday. Love to Maria and Cecil." Sounds like Danny was a bit of a daredevil. We have now travelled through almost a century of postcards. And look who's come to the surface again. Yes, it's our living legend, Nessie, sent from Inverness to Edinburgh on the 22nd of May, 1971. One of Scotland's most iconic symbols is pictured trying to grab a frightened fisherman, and the cheeky text reads, "They can't catch me." Still afloat in the foreground is the lifeboat for Campbelltown, and at the pier is the Duchess of Hamilton. The message on the reverse reads, "Dear Robert, as you can perhaps see from the postmark, we have actually used the van to go somewhere. The weather has been great for a few weeks now, so we are taking advantage of it while it lasts by going away weekends like this. We'll write a proper letter shortly. Love, James, Marilyn and Lorraine." Note the postage stamp has increased again and is now 5p, although this is by airmail to Australia. The postcard business was slowing down across Scotland and beyond. Here we see a postman taking the last collection at the Castle Street postbox in Edinburgh, before a post office strike in January 1971. It's almost time to box up our collection of pictorial postcards today. We started our communications in the late 1870s and have delivered you to the 1970s. Hopefully you've had a first-class time as we viewed a full century of postcards, plotting the landscapes of Scotland. This bespoke storage solution from 1910, a present from Dunbar, can hold 100 cards, so it is ideal. It's goodbye from this postcard seller too, complete with his tartan trolley by Princess Street Gardens in 1987. His sign reads, "English spoken," English spoken, American understood. And postcards cost only 10p. Finally, I would like to say thank you for listening, those of you in the room, those of you online, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.